US President Donald Trump is on his first official visit to India, and his welcome from Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been huge, colourful and noisy. Thousands lined the streets to welcome both leaders. Others cheered and later danced. Part of that welcome was also a sober visit to the Sabarmati ashram in India's Gujarat state. Indian independence leader Mahatma Gandhi lived here for more than a decade. Here, the Trumps tried their hand at a traditional charkha or spinning wheel that Gandhi popularized. It symbolized self-sufficiency during India's independence movement. Next was a raucous welcome at the world's biggest cricket stadium, where Trump and Modi addressed the thousands of cheering attendees.
The potential for India is absolutely incredible. India's rise as a prosperous and independent nation is an example to every nation all over the world and one of the most outstanding achievements of our century. It is all the more inspiring because you have done it as a democratic country. You have done it as a peaceful country. You have done it as a tolerant country. And you have done it as a great free country. There is all the difference in the world between a nation that seeks power through coercion, intimidation, and aggression, and a nation that rises by setting its people free and unleashing them to chase their dreams, and that is India.
India-USA relations are no longer just another partnership. It is a far greater and closer relationship.
But it's a relationship that's seen its share of stress, particularly last year. Let's begin with trade. The US is India's second biggest trading partner, but retaliatory tariffs between both countries have overshadowed this relationship. President Trump has announced progress on a big trade deal, but so far there hasn't been a breakthrough. Then there's the issue of security. The two countries have increased their military cooperation in recent years, and at Monday's event in Gujarat, Trump announced a $3 billion agreement with India to sell it military helicopters, something that had been in the works for some time. For more on the relations between both countries, I'm joined now by Ambassador Rakesh Sood, a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation in Delhi. Ambassador Sood has served as India's ambassador to France, Nepal and Afghanistan, and is an expert on India-US relations. Ambassador Sood, thank you so much for making the time. Would you say that a military relationship between India and US is becoming the cornerstone of ties between both countries?
No, I think I would make it much more broad-based. What is becoming the cornerstone is actually three factors. One is the opening up of the Indian economy, which began in the 1990s. The second is the fact that it is a post-Cold War world in which the geopolitical center of gravity is moving towards Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific. And the third is the coming into being of the Indian diaspora, which is now playing an increasingly important political role in US domestic politics. So actually, we have seen the relationship in this new avatar, in this new incarnation, begin with President Clinton, his visit in March 2000, followed by President George Bush, who committed to removing the nuclear hurdle from the relationship, and we saw the civil nuclear deal.
Right.
Then we saw President Obama coming in, who endorsed India's claim to a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, and he followed it up with a joint vision on the Indo-Pacific, which was a very clear recognition that a rising India, a strong India, was a source of stability in the region. Now, we will have to wait and see. And through all this, there has also been the growth in the defense relationship. After all, we only started buying defense equipment from the US in 2007.
Right.
And since 2007, I think we have accumulated purchases of something like $20 billion,
Right.
which is not an insignificant amount.
Let's look at the three factors that you mentioned. Let's handle them individually. Let's look at the post-Cold War Indo-Pacific, as has been referred to in the past. Now, in this Indo-Pacific, how sure is the United States that India will really play an important role? And is there somewhere a hope that India will actually be the counterweight it promises to be to China?
Well, I think that, first of all, is a growing realization that India is a potential partner. I think for both India and US, we have tried to develop an understanding of how to deal with each other. US has been used to dealing with countries as junior allies. You know, whether it is European countries, whether it is Japan, South Korea, these are all junior allies.
Right.
They are not equals. The only other relationship that the US had for an equal was its rivalry with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. India is obviously not going to be an ally or a junior partner. So there has to be a more coming to terms with each other as to how we deal with these issues in a different geopolitical setting, which is not Europe, because Europe went through the Cold War and the East-West divide. We are looking at a more crowded geopolitical space. And that is why India is also strengthening its partnerships with countries like Japan, with countries like Australia, with countries like France, which has an independent presence in the Indian Ocean region, and so on. So this is a different kind of a ball game in which there are new rules of engagement. So we can't look at it purely in the context of alliances, because even the US does not have the same, while the US considers China to be a strategic rival, but it is not as if US is not engaged with China. This is very different when the US was not engaged economically with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. But today, China is US's biggest trading partner.
Right. Just briefly, because we don't have that much...
there are a whole host of linkages.
Right. Just briefly, because we don't have so much time, Ambassador Sood. You talked about the opening up of the economy. Can India and the US trade on equal terms when it comes to trade, considering the friction between them on trade from last year?
Well, I think we have to look at it with a bit of perspective. In 1999, the India-US trade in goods and services was something like 16 billion, 1-6. Today, it is upwards of 145 billion.
Right.
That's a fairly significant increase. And at the same time, President Trump has made trade imbalances a major issue for his re-election year. So hence, the issue is getting a little more attention than it perhaps would have otherwise. But I'm quite sure that these are issues which can be finessed, which can be taken care of. After all, between India and European Union, we have a more or less balanced trade in goods and services, if you look at it.
Okay.
So there is no reason why we cannot have the same with the US. There will be things, perhaps, for which the US will have to open up its markets, particularly in the services field. And there will be areas where India will need to move away from the more recent trend towards protectionism that we have seen and accommodate US goods.
Right, and hopefully that happens as we move ahead. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Sood.
The United States is India's second largest trade partner after China. But in 2019, the US ended up with a deficit of around $23 billion in trade with India. Washington demands India must buy more American farm goods if it wants reinstatement of a key US trade concession and seal a wider pact. India, in turn, has offered to cut tariffs on chicken legs from 100 to 25%, but the US demands a cut to 10%. Well, another point of discussion is to get India to partially open up its dairy markets. Such a move, however, is unlikely to go down well in the world's largest milk-producing nation. Our correspondent Sonia Falnikar sent us this report.
This is how Dinesh Kumar begins his day. He's typical of millions of small dairy producers across India. His family doesn't own a farm. They take care of their cattle in their backyard. It's hard work. There's never a day off. He makes about 60,000 rupees selling his milk. That's around 775 euros a month. But buying fodder and medicine blows a big hole in his income. Dinesh is also saddled with debt. Loans he took out to cover his mounting costs. When all that's factored out, his income drops to just 10,000 rupees a month, around 130 euros.
Sometimes my cows and buffalo fall ill. Sometimes my own parents fall sick or my wife. And then there's school fees for my children. We just about manage to scratch out a living.
Dinesh Kumar is exactly the kind of dairy farmer who could be impacted if India and the US agree on a trade deal that gives American dairy producers easier access to the market here. India has long protected its farmers by restricting cheap dairy imports. An extensive network of cooperatives and small vendors reduces middlemen, so producers also receive a sizable fraction of the retail price paid by consumers, up to 70% of it. But many fear that could all end. Prahlad Singh heads a local unit of a national farmers' organization here in Uttar Pradesh.
If there's a dairy deal with the US and milk imports are allowed, prices could fall. That will pose a huge threat to marginal dairy farmers and labourers. They'll be staring at major losses.
But not everyone is worried. At this private dairy farm, almost every step of the process has been mechanized. The cows here are milked twice a day. They're Holstein Friesians, a European breed. The company, Oleche, is a new niche player in the industry. Vaibhav Agarwal is its co-founder. He produces what he says is pure milk, free of hormones or adulterants, an issue that remains a widespread concern in India.
This is a pasteurizing milk.
The premium milk is pasteurized here. Agarwal doesn't view US dairy imports as a threat, he says, because his unique selling point is freshness and rapid delivery, just 12 hours from cow to customer. But the entrepreneur, who is a vegetarian, does have misgivings about a trade deal with the US, especially an aspect that has proved a major stumbling block in negotiations for years.
There are concerns in India that the fodder given to cows in the US contains meat components. Cows in Hinduism are sacred, so there are religious sentiments involved.
India is also a huge consumer of milk, which is used to make yogurt, cheese, and a wide range of Indian sweets. For American dairy producers, despite the complications, the country remains a huge untapped market, at least for now.
And our reporter Sonia Falnikar joins me now from Delhi. Sonia, now given the religious and socio-economical implications you mentioned in your report, how likely is it that Narendra Modi will open up the Indian dairy market to the US?
Well, Monica, I think that is actually highly unlikely. I mean, we have to remember that the US and India have been negotiating these dairy imports literally for years, and it's a very complicated process. And there are many reasons for it, as we saw in that report. But, you know, even at home, Modi does face a lot of domestic pressures. He faces pressures from many, many farmer groups who are vocally opposed to any kind of trade deal that would see cheaper dairy imports coming in. That remains a big problem. And I think we have to remember that there are really genuine concerns in India that, you know, if dairy imports do come in, the 150 million marginal and small farmers who form really the backbone of the dairy economy here, they could you know, really be crippled by these imports. So I think that remains a big concern. Another problem is, you know, that the rural economy is already in India suffering from many problems, and this could just further pile on the pressure.
So tough talks ahead there, certainly when it comes to agriculture. What is the chemistry between Narendra Modi and US President Donald Trump? Do you think that they see eye to eye and will be able to actually strike a deal?
Well, I think there's a very strong chemistry between the two leaders, and that was very much on display today as Trump visited the western city of Ahmedabad, and Modi gave him, you know, a lavish reception where with 100,000 people cheering in arms. But those personal bonds, I think, are not enough. The two countries are really very far apart on several trade issues. They have to really iron out a lot of differences when it comes to agricultural trade, when it comes to intellectual property rights, tariffs. There are also US concerns about about rules in India that favor domestic e-commerce companies. So I think it remains a tricky issue. Tariffs have really complicated this problem ever since the US suspended India's preferential trade status last year. Donald Trump has also called the US the king of tariffs. So I think stocks are really stuck here. I don't see how this can really go forward right now.
All right. Well, it'd be interesting to see. The visit is still to last a bit longer. Sonia Falnika, they're reporting for us from Delhi. Thank you so much.